Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God, back with you with the next video in my series reading Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Oliver Twist as read by Lord Naren White. For some time he appeared doubtful whether he ought to be relieved or disappointed by the intelligence, but at length he breathed more freely, and, withdrawing his eyes, observed that it was no great matter. With that he rose, as if to depart. But Mr. Bumble was cunning enough, and he at once saw that an opportunity was opened for the lucrative disposal of some secret in the possession of his better half. He well remembered the night of old Sally's death, which the occurrences of that day had given him good reason to recollect, as the occasion on which he had proposed to Mrs. Corney, and although that lady had never confided to him the disclosure of which she had been the solitary witness, he had heard enough to know that it related to something that had occurred in the old woman's attendance, as workhouse nurse, upon the young mother of Oliver Twist. Hastily calling this circumstance to mind, he informed the stranger, with an air of mystery, that one woman had been closeted with the old harridan shortly before she died, and that she could, as he had reason to believe, throw some light on the subject of his inquiry. "How can I find her?" said the stranger, thrown off his guard, and plainly showing that all his fears, whatever they were aroused afresh by the intelligence. "Only through me," rejoined Mr. Bumble. "When?" cried the stranger hastily. "Tomorrow," rejoined Bumble. "At 9 in the evening," said the stranger, producing a scrap of paper, and writing down upon it an obscure address by the water side in characters that betrayed his agitation. "At 9 in the evening, bring her to me there. I needn't tell you to be secret. It's your interest." With these words, he led the way to the door, after stopping to pay for the liquor that had been drunk. Shortly remarking that their roads were different, he departed without more ceremony than an emphatic repetition of the hour of appointment for the following night. On glancing at the address, the parochial functionary observed that it contained no name. The stranger had not gone far, so he made after him to ask it. "What do you want?" cried the man, turning quickly round, as Bumble touched him on the arm. "Following me?" "Only to ask a question," said the other, pointing to the scrap of paper. "What name am I to ask for?" "Monk's," rejoined the man, and strode hastily away. Chapter 38, containing an account of what passed between Mr. and Mrs. Bumble and Mr. Monks at their nocturnal interview. It was a dull, close, overcast summer evening. The clouds, which had been threatening all day, spread out in a dense and sluggish mass of vapor, already yielded large drops of rain and seemed to presage a violent thunderstorm, when Mr. and Mrs. Bumble, turning out of the main street of the town, directed their course towards a scattered little colony of ruinous houses, distant from it some mile and a half, or thereabouts, and erected on a low, unwholesome swamp bordering upon the river. They were both wrapped in old and shabby outer garments, which might, perhaps, serve the double purpose of protecting their persons from the rain, and sheltering them from observation. The husband carried a lantern, from which, however, no light yet shone, and trudged on a few paces in front, as though, the way being dirty, to give his wife the benefit of treading in his heavy footprints. They went on in profound silence. Every now and then Mr. Bumble relaxed his pace and turned his head as if to make sure that his helpmate was following. Then, discovering that she was close at his heels, he mended his rate of walking and proceeded, at a considerable increase of speed, towards their place of destination. This was far from being a place of doubtful character, for it had long been known as the residence of none but low ruffians, who, under various pretenses of living by their labor, subsisted chiefly on plunder and crime. It was a collection of mere hovels, some hastily built with loose bricks, others of old worm-eaten ship timber, jumbled together without any attempt at order or arrangement, and planted for the most part within a few feet of the river's bank. A few leaky boats drawn up on the mud and made fast to the dwarf wall which skirted it, and here and there an oar or coil of rope appeared at first to indicate the inhabitants of these miserable cottages pursued some avocation on the river, but at a glance at the shattered and useless condition of the articles thus displayed would have led a passer-by, without much difficulty, to the conjecture that they were disposed there rather for the preservation of appearances than with any view to their being actually employed. In the heart of these cluster of huts, and skirting the river which its upper stories overhung, stood a large building formerly used as a manufactory of some kind. It had in its day probably furnished employment to the inhabitants surrounding tenements, but it had long since gone to ruin. The rat, the worm, and the action of the damp had weakened and rotted the piles on which it stood, and a considerable portion of the building had already sunk down into the water, while the remainder, tottering and bending over the dark stream, seemed to wait a favorable opportunity of following its old companion and involving itself in the same fate. It was before the ruinous building that the worthy couple paused, as the first peal of distant thunder reverberated in the air, and the rain commenced pouring violently down. "The place should be somewhere here," said Bumble, consulting a scrap of paper he held in his hand. "Halloa there!" cried a voice from above. Following the sound, Mr. Bumble raised his head, and descried a man looking out of a door breast high on the second story. "Stand still a minute," cried the voice. "I'll be with you directly," with which the head disappeared and the door closed. "Is that the man?" asked Mr. Bumble's good lady. Mr. Bumble nodded in the affirmative. "Then mind what I've told you," said the matron, "and be careful to say as little as you can, or you'll betray us at once." Mr. Bumble, who had eyed the building with very rueful looks, was apparently about to express some doubts relative to the advisability of proceeding any further with the enterprise just then, when he was prevented by the appearance of Monks, who opened a small door near which they stood and beckoned them inwards. "Come in," he cried impatiently, stamping his foot on the ground. "Don't keep me there. Don't keep me here. Excuse me." The woman, who had hesitated at first, walked boldly in, without any other invitation. Mr. Bumble, who was ashamed or afraid to lag behind, followed, obviously very ill at ease, and with scarcely any of that remarkable dignity which was usually his chief characteristic. "What the devil made you stand there lingering there, in the wet?" said Monks, turning round, and addressing Bumble after he had bolted the door behind them. We were only cooling ourselves," stammered Bumble, looking apprehensively about him. "Cooling yourselves?" retorted Monks. "Not all the rain that ever fell, or ever will fall, will put as much of hell's fire out as a man can carry about with him. You won't cool yourself so easily, don't think it." With this agreeable speech, Monks turned short upon the matron, and bent his gaze upon her, till even she, who was not easily cowed, was fain to withdraw her eyes, and turn them towards the ground. "This is the woman, is it?" demanded Monks. This is the woman," replied Mr. Bumble, mindful of wife's caution. "You think women never can keep secrets, I suppose?" said the matron, interposing and returning as she spoke the searching look of Monks. "I know they will always keep one till it's found out," said Monks. "And what may that be?" asked the matron. "The loss of their own good name," replied Monks. "So, by the same rule, if a woman's a party to a secret that might hang or transport her, I'm not afraid of telling it to anybody. Not I. Do you understand, mistress?" "No," rejoined the matron, slightly coloring as she spoke. "Of course you don't," said Monks. "How should you?" And we'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care and thanks again.